Hey guys, welcome to my list of my top 10 favorite movies of 2022. You know, at this point I am starting to realize how arbitrary and pointless these lists kinda are. Is there really anything to be gained by comparing and contrasting vastly different movies that came out in the same year? And does anybody even really care what little old me thought was the 8th best movie of the year? That being said, I like making these pointless lists, and I'm gonna keep doing them for the foreseeable future. So as always, I didn't get around to seeing every movie that was critically acclaimed, or even every movie that I like the look of, which include Avatar 2, The Whale, She Said, Mad God, Athena, The Eternal Daughter, Women Talking, Babylon, Bones and All Quiet on the Western Front. And also, as always, I want to give a big shout out to movies that just missed the cut. Glass Onion, Barbarian, Vengeance, On the Count of Three, The Northman, Belle, Bullet Train, Triangle of Sadness, and Puss in Boots 2. So without further ado, here's my top 10 movies of 2022. Number 10, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. I've checked out a few top 10 of the year videos and I haven't seen this movie on anybody's lists. And I get why, it's a pretty stupid movie and there's a handful of comedic moments that don't really work. But if you know anything about me or you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that much like Pedro Pascal's character in the movie, I'm obsessed with Nicolas Cage. He's my favorite actor, and this movie is a love letter to Nicolas Cage, starring Nicolas Cage, and has a guest appearance from a deepfake young Nicolas Cage. They name drop and reference a lot of Nicolas Cage movies, and there's some nice Easter eggs for the true fans. But what really made this movie work was the chemistry between Pedro Pascal and Nicolas Cage. When the two of them are interacting, the movie is a goddamn blast. I almost wish that there was no, action conflict and it was just a movie about their friendship. And also, quick plug for my YouTube channel. I do a thing where I slowly work my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography and review all his movies. So if you want to see me elaborate on my thoughts on The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, I'll probably get around to it in about 10 years, so make sure you subscribe. Number 9, The Banshees of Inisherin. 2022 was a really good year for horror. But despite having no overt horror element apart from the word banshee in the name, The Banshees of Inisherin taps into one of my biggest fears. Being in a pub and your friend is annoyed at you and you don't really know why. To me, I'd rather face down 100 pearls and predators and pinheads than go through the anxiety of that. And it's explored really well here. I like the backdrop of the Irish Civil War, and I thought that that served as a nice allegory for the central conflict of the film. A futile fight that distracts from more pertinent problems that are going on. All the performances are really good. Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson are great, and I was really impressed by Barry Keoghan. The movie had some nice moments of dark comedy sprinkled in, but overall it's a somber, melancholic story that has a fable-like quality to it. And if you told me it was based on an old Irish play from the 1920s, I wouldn't have been surprised, and I mean that as a compliment. Number 8, inu-oh. I'm getting pretty tired of movies about the rise to fame of a musician or a band. Even the one directed by Baz Luhrmann starring Tom Hanks in a fat suit kinda bored me. And then came inu-oh, the anime movie about a blind lute player who dresses effeminately, and he's visited by the ghost of his dad, and he collaborates with a guy with scales on his back with one really long arm like an orangutan, and he's got eyes like a Picasso painting, and he dances and sings. And the music that the two of them make together is like the Japanese version of 70s rock. This movie looks beautiful, I love the characters, love the music. And if more musician movies were anything like inu-oh, I'd be all in. Number 7, The Batman. I was skeptical going into this just because I thought, do we really need a new Batman movie? And I walked out going, man, I had forgotten how much I love Batman. Right after watching the movie, I rewatched the animated series and I replayed Arkham City. And it made me remember why I wrote my dissertation on The Dark Knight Returns. Because Batman and Gotham City can be so cool and fascinating if utilized well. And I think The Batman was an awesome take on it. I distinctly remember watching Season 1, Episode 3 of the show Sherlock, where Moriarty was holding people hostage and he was making Sherlock solve puzzles around the city. And I remember thinking at the time, this would make a great Batman movie. And about 10 years later, I got my wish with this gritty David Fincher-esque detective mystery. I like that they really played into the detective aspect of Batman, which even the Nolan movies didn't fully explore. And I don't know if Robert Pattinson's depiction of Batman is technically the best, but I loved his take. I thought it was refreshingly different. An inexperienced, sensitive Batman who listens to Nirvana might not be the Batman we deserve, but he's the one I need right now. Number 6, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. I didn't see the other Pinocchio movie that came out in 2022. I really didn't have any interest in a straightforward Disney live-action remake, but give me a stop-motion adaptation set during World War I and I'm down. And I really love this movie. Guillermo del Toro is often pretty hit and miss for me, but I almost always really like his character design, and I especially loved it here. This movie looks incredible. The voice acting is great, and there's some of my favorite actors of all time in the cast here. But in particular, I was really impressed by David Bradley, who was heartbreaking as Geppetto. I really liked that the movie didn't pull any emotional punches. It's about grief and death. And the ending to the movie really stuck in my head for a long time. I found it hard to sleep that night because the ending affected me so deeply. It got me thinking about the inevitability of loss and death, but there was still a bittersweet aspect to it. And also there's a musical number involving Pooh and Mussolini, which I can only assume doesn't happen in the Disney version. Number 5, Pearl. And also X, but mainly Pearl. Ty West would probably get my award for Most Improved, if that was a thing that I gave out, which it isn't. I mean, I like to judge a director by what they contribute to an anthology movie, because that's your chance to get creative, show your talent in a short amount of time, but also keep your segment thematically relevant to the subject matter of the anthology. And based solely on Ty West's contributions in 2012 to VHS and ABC's of Death, I thought he was one of the biggest hacks out there. His segment in VHS was boring, forgettable, it had a terrible payoff. And it especially doesn't really make sense in the context of these VHS movies. Why would that tape even be a big deal in this universe where you've got quote-unquote real tapes of stuff like goat-headed minotaurs and women with Venus flytrap vaginas? And his segment M is for Miscarriage in ABC's of Death was even worse. As far as I know, everybody had the same small budget to work on, and some people really tried hard. I mean, look at this robot from one of the other stories. But Ty West just dumped a bunch of red stuff in the toilet and called it a short story. What a bunch of lazy bullshit. Sorry I got carried away there. I know this isn't my top 10 worst horror anthologies of 2012 list. So let's flash forward to 10 years later where Ty West made 2 of my favorite films of the year. X and especially its prequel Pearl are the opposite of lazy in terms of filmmaking. I love the attention to detail in emulating the visual style of different eras. X straight up looks like a 70s Texas Chainsaw Massacre era movie, which complements the story about a bunch of hippies who encounter a slasher at a barn. And Pearl has that shot-in Technicolor style reminiscent of Wizard of Oz, which ties into her dreams of making it as an actress, and also adds a surreal vibe and the vibrant colors contrast with the dark subject matter. X had a really cool style with great kills and interesting characters. In particular, the old lady made me think, wow, I'd love to see her story. And then 6 months later, we got to see her story in the movie Pearl, which I think was even better than X. I like that it was more of a character study and it showcased what might be my favorite performance in any movie this year from Mia Goth. That final monologue was something else. And I love it when a movie's closing shot lingers on an actor's face for what feels like ages. But Pearl might have my favorite example of that. And suffice to say, I'm very excited for Maxine. Number 4, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. I was talking earlier about how the ending of Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio played so deeply in my mind. Well, the last 20 minutes of this movie made me cry so hard that I had to turn the film off and watch the rest the next morning. And this is a mockumentary about a stop-motion shoe-wearing shell. I adored this shell. I rooted for this shell so hard and I connected to him harder than any other character in 2022. And he's a goddamn shoe-wearing shell. He's adorable and he's funny. I love that he asked so many questions because it also helped to develop the documentarian character. And I was pleasantly surprised that even he had a character arc. There are so many movies that I watch and when they end I just feel nothing. But this movie made me laugh, it charmed me, it warmed my heart, and it entirely reduced me into a sobbing emotional wreck. So I'm giving this movie a lot of kudos for reminding me that I'm not a robot. Number 3, The Menu. I think if A24 produced a remake of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it would come out looking something like this. I know it's not an A24 film, but it has that dark artsiness of one. I've seen a few people complaining about the characters acting unrealistically, but that didn't bother me because of the satirical nature of the subject matter. Satire of the rich has been pretty popular lately, and this is one of the better ones in my opinion. But also I didn't think that the characters were one-note or poorly written. I thought Nicholas Hoult was hilarious. And I love Ralph Fiennes as the head chef. He nailed those introductory monologues about the meals. It's a pretty thrilling movie. I mean, it's clear from the get-go that something's simmering, if you pardon the food expression, but it's not immediately apparent why and when shit is about to go down. And when it does, it's a blast. I mean, it's a really entertaining, darkly comedic ride. There's so many parts that I want to talk about, but I don't want to ruin them. So let's just say I really like Taco Tuesday, The Mess, and Tyler's Bullshit. Oh, and that burger looks so goddamn good. Number 2, RRR. I think the movie I've seen appear as most people's favorite of 2022 is Top Gun Maverick. But outside of the Val Kilmer part, which was very sad, Top Gun 2 didn't really leave any impact on me. I didn't particularly like it, I didn't dislike it, I just kinda nothinged it. But there was another big budget action movie in 2022 that was heavy on the male bonding that did impress me, and that's RRR. I think the only Bollywood movie I've ever seen was a movie from like 2010 about a robot or something, and I turned it off like halfway. This is a Tollywood movie. It's cartoonish, it's 3 hours long, and has a dance battle sequence, and I loved it. I mean, I thought I would just tolerate the musical number, but that was one of my favorite parts. I don't want to keep comparing this movie to Top Gun because it is kind of apples and oranges. Especially because this movie is so CGI heavy and that has a lot of practical stunts, which I respect. But for the most part, I got what I expected from Top Gun. But going into RRR, I didn't expect to see two guys shaking hands while dangling from a bridge over a fire. I also didn't expect to see a shootout involving a guy piggybacking another guy. And I really didn't expect to see a part where a truck unleashes a load of tigers and deer on a party full of colonizers. Wait, why were the tiger and the deer in the same cage? Don't worry about it. But even outside of the admittedly somewhat silly but awesome action, I really appreciated how much time they spent developing the two lead characters, giving them lengthy backstories and motivations that you really cared about. I really felt like I knew these characters and felt deeply invested in them by the end. I got genuine thrills from watching this movie that I don't often get from other blockbusters. Maybe part of my enjoyment came from the novelty of watching a movie from a culture that I'm not familiar with. But if this is only the tip of the iceberg of Indian cinema, then I've got some great movies to discover. Number 1, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Movies and shows often come in trends, and right now we're in the multiverse era. I love the idea of an infinite amount of parallel universes, but often when media explores it, it's like, oh, here's Data from another universe, but he has blue eyes instead of yellow eyes. I mean, that's fine for 1993, but what's Doctor Strange 2's excuse? When the premise is that there's a universe of infinite possibilities, why have we so rarely seen that potential explored? Then Everything Everywhere All at Once came along and it gave me everything I wanted out of a multiverse story, all at once. This movie is the perfect combination of 3 awesome elements. First off, you have all the fun sci-fi multiverse stuff that I already mentioned, and that's explored to its fullest potential. The talking rock part is the epitome of that. But my favorite universe had to be the raccoon ratatouille guy, and the payoff to that is hilarious. The second key element is all the philosophical and existential themes. It dives into some deep ideas. Like, if I exist in a vast multiverse of possibilities, then do I even matter? And heavy concepts like nihilism are represented by a giant bagel. And the third part that made this movie work so well is the grounded family relationship and the character arcs. You got realistic, compelling storylines, like the woman in a funk trying to get a handle on her financial struggles, the husband that's aware that the love has gone out of his marriage and he's looking for a divorce, and the daughter struggling to be accepted as a lesbian. And the everyday issues, the sci-fi, and the philosophy are all weaved together so perfectly in this story. And that's why it's my favorite movie of the year. Extremely creative, thought-provoking, and refreshingly weird. At least this version of me thought so. So that's been my top 10 favorite movies of 2022. Thanks for watching.